The stagecoach lurched to a stop in front of the weathered general store, and Catherine Parker pressed her gloved hand against her ribcage, feeling the bruises beneath her traveling dress as she gathered the courage to step into her new life in Enid, Oklahoma territory, where a stranger who had paid for her passage surely expected something in return. She had learned long ago that men who owned things believed they owned people too. Her father had taught her that lesson with his fists and belt. Her brother had reinforced it with his cruel words and crueler hands after their father died, leaving her trapped in a Philadelphia tenement with nowhere to run until she saw the advertisement seeking a bride for a rancher in the Oklahoma territory. The letter from Thomas Irwin had been brief and businesslike, offering marriage, a home and security in exchange for companionship, and help managing his homestead. Catherine had written back immediately, knowing that any life had to be better than the one she was leaving behind. The journey west had taken 3 weeks, and with each mile her anxiety had grown alongside a strange, desperate hope. She told herself not to hope. Hope was dangerous. Hope made the disappointments hurt worse. Men were cruel, and powerful men were crueler still. A rancher prosperous enough to pay for a mail-order bride would certainly expect obedience, and she had learned to make herself small and quiet to avoid the worst of male anger. The driver opened the door, and Catherine accepted his weathered hand as she stepped down onto the dusty street. The October sun was setting behind the low buildings, casting everything in shades of amber and gold. Enid was smaller than she had imagined, just a collection of wooden structures scattered across the prairie, but it looked clean and orderly. Settlers moved along the street with purpose, women in simple dresses and men in work clothes, all going about their evening business. "Miss Parker." A deep voice spoke from behind her, and Catherine flinched before she could stop herself. She turned slowly, keeping her eyes downcast as she had been trained to do, seeing first the dusty boots, then the worn denim pants, the simple cotton shirt, and finally lifting her gaze to the face of the man who now owned her future. Thomas Irwin was younger than she expected, perhaps 27 or 28 to her 22 years. He had dark hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of creek water in summer, green with flecks of brown. His face was tanned from outdoor work, and he held his hat in his hands, turning it nervously between his fingers. "Yes, sir," Catherine said quietly, waiting for whatever came next. "I am Thomas Irwin. I hope your journey was not too difficult." His voice was gentler than she expected, and when she risked a glance at his face, she saw no anger there, only uncertainty that matched her own. "It was tolerable, thank you." Thomas shifted his weight from one foot to the other, looking as uncomfortable as she felt. "I have a wagon just there. I thought we might speak with Reverend Matthews tonight if you are not too tired, unless you would prefer to wait until you have rested. I have arranged for you to stay at the boarding house tonight, in your own room, of course. I did not want you to feel rushed or uncomfortable." Catherine stared at him, certain she had misheard. "My own room?" "Yes, I thought that would be proper. We are strangers, after all. I know the circumstances are unusual, but I wanted you to know that I have no expectations beyond what you are comfortable with." Thomas met her eyes, and she saw sincerity there that made her chest tighten with an emotion she could not name. "That is very considerate," she managed, though the words felt inadequate. Thomas collected her trunk from the stagecoach driver, hefting it easily onto his broad shoulders, and led her to a wagon hitched to 2 sturdy horses. He placed her trunk in the back with a gentleness that surprised her. Most men threw things around to demonstrate their strength. He offered his hand to help her onto the wagon seat, and when she took it, his grip was firm but careful, releasing her the moment she was settled. As they drove through the quiet streets, Thomas pointed out the various establishments: the general store, the blacksmith, the doctor's office, and the small white church at the edge of town. Enid is only 4 years old, he explained. It was established during the land run of 1893. I claimed my 160 acres that September, and I have been working the ranch ever since. I raise cattle mostly, some horses. It is a good life, honest work. It sounds like you have built something substantial, Catherine said, watching his profile as the last light caught in his hair. I have been fortunate. The land is good and my herd has grown steadily, but a ranch requires more work than one person can manage alone, and He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. I found myself wanting someone to share it with, not just the work but the life. The meals and the evenings and the future. Catherine felt tears prick her eyes and blinked them back fiercely. She would not cry in front of this man. She would not show weakness until she understood what he truly wanted from her. The boarding house was a neat 2-story structure painted white with green shutters. An older woman with kind eyes and gray hair pulled back in a bun greeted them at the door. "You must be Miss Parker. I am Margaret Sullivan. I run this establishment and Thomas has secured our best room for you. Come in, dear. You must be exhausted from your travels." Thomas carried her trunk upstairs while Margaret led Catherine to a small but spotlessly clean room with a real bed, a washstand with a porcelain basin, and lace curtains on the window. It was nicer than anywhere Catherine had lived in years. "I will leave you to rest," Thomas said from the doorway. "Would it be acceptable if I called for you at 9 tomorrow morning? We could speak with Reverend Matthews then, if you are still willing." "That would be fine, thank you." He nodded and turned to leave, then paused. "Miss Parker, I want you to know that you are safe here. You are safe with me. I may not say things properly or do everything right, but I will never hurt you. That is a promise I make on my honor." Before Catherine could respond, he was gone, his boots echoing down the hallway. She sat on the edge of the bed and pressed her hands to her face, finally allowing the tears to fall. They were not tears of fear or sadness, but something else entirely, something fragile and terrifying that felt dangerously close to hope. Margaret brought her a supper tray with roasted chicken, fresh bread, and apple pie. Catherine ate mechanically, tasting nothing, her mind spinning with confusion. Every instinct told her to be cautious, to watch for the moment when Thomas would reveal his true nature, when the kindness would crack and show the cruelty underneath. Men did not pay for mail-order brides out of simple loneliness. They wanted servants or worse. But another part of her, the part that had been beaten down but never quite destroyed, whispered that perhaps Thomas Irwin was different. Perhaps there were still good men in the world. She slept fitfully that night, waking often to strange sounds and the unfamiliar softness of the mattress. In Philadelphia, she had slept on a thin pallet in a corner of her brother's apartment, always alert for his late-night visits when he was drunk and mean. Here, she had a door that locked and silence broken only by the wind. Morning came too quickly. Catherine washed with the water Margaret had left in the pitcher and dressed in her best dress, a simple blue cotton that was faded but clean. She brushed out her dark blonde hair and pinned it up carefully, studying her reflection in the small mirror. She looked pale and nervous, with shadows under her hazel eyes, but there was nothing to be done about that. Thomas arrived precisely at 9, dressed in clean clothes with his dark hair combed back. He offered her his arm, and they walked together to the church. Reverend Matthews was a jovial man in his 50s who welcomed them warmly and spoke to them about the sanctity of marriage and the importance of mutual respect and partnership. Catherine heard the words from a distance, nodding when expected, speaking her responses in the proper places. Then Thomas was sliding a simple gold band onto her finger, and the Reverend was pronouncing them husband and wife. Thomas looked at her with a question in his eyes, and when she gave a tiny nod, he leaned down and pressed a brief, chaste kiss to her lips. His mouth was warm and gentle, nothing like the harsh, demanding kisses her brother's friends had stolen in dark hallways. They signed the marriage register, and suddenly Catherine Parker was Catherine Irwin, wife of a rancher in the Oklahoma Territory, tied to a man she had known for less than a day. Thomas helped her into the wagon, and they drove out of town heading west into open prairie. The October morning was cool and clear, the sky an endless blue above rolling grasslands that stretched to the horizon. Catherine had never seen so much space. Philadelphia had been all cramped buildings and narrow streets, the sky reduced to a strip between tenement roofs. Here, the world felt impossibly vast. "The ranch is about 5 miles from town," Thomas said. "Close enough to reach easily but far enough for privacy and good grazing land. I built the house myself over 2 winters. It is not fancy, but it is solid and comfortable." "I am sure it is fine," Catherine said, gripping her hands together in her lap. They rode in silence for a while, the only sounds the creak of the wagon and the steady clop of hooves. Finally, Thomas said, "You do not have to be afraid of me, Catherine. I know I am a stranger, and I know you have traveled far to marry someone you have never met. That takes remarkable courage. I want you to know that I will do everything in my power to be a good husband to you. Why did you really send for a bride?" The question escaped before Catherine could stop it. "Forgive me, I should not have asked. It is a fair question." Thomas guided the horses around a shallow creek. "The truth is that I was lonely. I have spent 4 years building the ranch, working from dawn until long after dark, and I realized that I had created a home but had no one to share it with. Most of the available women in Enid are already spoken for, and those who are not." He paused. "I wanted someone who would choose this life knowing what it was, someone looking for a new beginning, as I was when I came here, someone who might understand what it means to build something from nothing. And you expect nothing in return." Thomas pulled the wagon to a stop and turned to face her fully. "I expect honesty. I expect that if you are unhappy or need something, you will tell me. I expect that you will work alongside me as a partner, not as a servant. And I hope in time that we might build affection and trust between us. But I will never force you to anything. Your body is your own, Catherine. Your thoughts are your own. I offer you a home and my name and my protection, and I ask only that you offer me your company and whatever friendship we might develop." Catherine searched his face for deception and found none. "I do not understand you, Thomas Irwin. That is fair. I do not quite understand you either, but we have time to learn." He smiled, a real smile that transformed his serious face into something warmer. "We have all the time we need." The ranch house came into view over a small rise, a sturdy structure built from lumber and stone with a wide front porch and real glass windows. Behind it stood a large barn and several outbuildings, and beyond that, cattle dotted the grassland as far as Catherine could see. It was not a grand estate, but it was substantial and well-maintained, the work of someone who took pride in what he had built. Thomas helped her down from the wagon and carried her trunk inside. The interior was simple but surprisingly clean for a bachelor household. A main room with a stone fireplace, a kitchen area with a good iron stove, and 2 bedrooms separated by a curtain that could be drawn for privacy. The furniture was handmade but well crafted, and everywhere Catherine looked she saw evidence of careful attention. "This is your room," Thomas said, setting her trunk in the smaller of the 2 bedrooms. It had a real bed with a quilt, a wardrobe, and a small table with a lantern. "Mine is there." I know it is unusual for married couples to sleep separately, but I meant what I said about you being comfortable. When and if you want that to change, you need only tell me. Thomas, I do not know what to say. Then say nothing for now. Let me show you the rest of the ranch and we can have some lunch. You must be hungry. He was right. She was starving. Nerves had kept her from eating much of the breakfast Margaret had provided. Thomas gave her a tour of the property, pointing out the barn where he kept his horses, the chicken coop that needed tending each morning, the vegetable garden that had mostly finished for the season, and the spring house where he kept things cool. His pride in the place was evident in every word, and Catherine found herself relaxing slightly as he talked about his plans for expansion and improvement. They ate lunch on the front porch, simple sandwiches and cold water, watching the cattle graze in the distance. The October sun was warm, and a light breeze carried the scent of grass and earth. Catherine realized with a start that she felt almost peaceful, a sensation so foreign she barely recognized it. "Tell me about yourself," Thomas said. "Your letters were brief. I know you are from Philadelphia and that you are 22, but little else." Catherine chose her words carefully. "There is not much to tell. My mother died when I was young and my father passed 3 years ago. I lived with my brother until recently. We did not get along well." "Did he hurt you?" The question was direct and Thomas's voice had gone hard. Catherine froze, her sandwich forgotten in her hands. "Why would you ask that?" "Because you flinch when people move too quickly. Because you keep your eyes down and make yourself small as though trying not to be noticed. Because I saw bruises on your wrists when you took off your gloves to sign the marriage register." Thomas set down his own food and turned to face her fully. "I am not a sophisticated man, Catherine, but I recognize the signs of someone who has been mistreated. And I want you to know that it will never happen here. Not from me, not from anyone. You are under my protection now, and I take that seriously." Tears spilled down Catherine's cheeks before she could stop them. She pressed her hands to her face, mortified by the display of emotion, but Thomas simply waited, giving her time to compose herself. Finally, she lowered her hands and met his eyes. "Yes, he hurt me. My brother had a terrible temper, especially when he drank, which was often. After my father died, I had nowhere else to go and no money of my own. I endured it because I had no choice. When I saw your advertisement, I answered it the same day. Anything, even marrying a complete stranger, seemed better than staying there. I am sorry you suffered that, and I am grateful you found the courage to leave. No one will hurt you again, Catherine. I swear it." The sincerity in his voice broke something open inside her chest, some tight knot of fear and mistrust that she had carried for so long it had become part of her. She found herself telling Thomas things she had never spoken aloud, about her mother's gentle hands and early death, about her father's descent into drunken violence, about her brother's cruel friends and the constant fear that had colored every day of her life in Philadelphia. Thomas listened without interruption, his jaw tight with barely contained anger at what she described, but his eyes remained kind. When she finally ran out of words, Thomas reached across the space between them and took her hand gently. "Thank you for trusting me with that. I know it was not easy to speak of, and I want you to know that you have value, Catherine. You are not a burden or a problem to be managed. You are a person worthy of respect and kindness. I hope in time I can help you see yourself the way I already see you." "And how is that?" Catherine whispered. "As brave, as strong, as someone who survived terrible things and kept going. That takes more courage than most people have." They sat together on the porch until the sun began to sink toward the western horizon, talking about easier things. His plans for the ranch, her interest in reading and gardening, his terrible attempts at cooking that often ended with burned suppers, her skill with a needle that had kept her and her brother clothed despite their poverty. The conversation flowed more easily than Catherine had imagined possible, and she found herself laughing at Thomas's story about a stubborn cow that had chased him halfway across the pasture. As twilight settled over the prairie, painting the sky in shades of purple and pink, Thomas stood and stretched. "I should tend to the horses and check on the cattle before full dark. Would you like to come with me, or would you prefer to rest?" "I would like to come, if that is all right." Thomas's smile was warm. "I would be glad of the company." They walked together to the barn, and Thomas showed Catherine how he cared for each horse, brushing them down and checking their hooves with a gentleness that surprised her. He clearly loved the animals, speaking to them in low, soothing tones as he worked. He introduced her to each one: Storm, a gray gelding with a white blaze; Copper, a chestnut mare with a sweet temperament; and Dakota, a spirited black stallion that Thomas had raised from a foal. "Would you like to try brushing Copper?" Thomas offered her the brush. "She is very gentle and loves attention." Catherine took the brush hesitantly and approached the mare, who turned her large dark eyes on her with interest. Following Thomas's example, Catherine began to brush the horse's flank in long, smooth strokes. Copper nickered softly and leaned into the attention, and Catherine felt a smile tug at her lips. "She likes you," Thomas said. "Horses are excellent judges of character." They finished the evening chores together, and Thomas walked Catherine through what needed to be done each day: feeding the chickens, collecting eggs, checking water troughs, and various other tasks. He never ordered or commanded. Instead, he explained and asked if she felt comfortable helping. It was a partnership, just as he had promised. Back at the house, Thomas heated water for washing and hung a curtain to give Catherine privacy. She cleaned away the dust of the day and changed into her nightgown and robe, emerging to find Thomas had laid out cold supper: bread, cheese, dried apples, and fresh milk from the cow he kept in the barn. They ate by lamplight, the silence comfortable now rather than strained. Catherine found her eyes growing heavy, exhaustion from the long journey and emotional upheaval finally catching up with her. "You should rest," Thomas said gently. "Tomorrow will be soon enough to establish routines and plan the work. Tonight, just sleep and know that you are safe." Catherine nodded and stood, pausing before going to her room. "Thomas, thank you for everything, for your kindness. I am not accustomed to it, and I do not quite know how to respond, but I am grateful. You owe me no gratitude for treating you as you deserve to be treated. Sleep well, Catherine." In her small room, Catherine lay in the comfortable bed and stared at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the prairie night: wind in the grass, distant cattle lowing, the creak of the house settling. In the next room, she could hear Thomas moving quietly, preparing for his own rest. For the first time in years, she felt no fear about falling asleep, no need to stay alert for danger. Exhaustion pulled her under like a gentle tide, and she slept more deeply than she had since childhood. The next weeks fell into a comfortable rhythm that astonished Catherine with its ease. Each morning, she woke to find Thomas already up and working on the early chores. He would return to the house for breakfast, which Catherine learned to prepare on the good iron stove. Her first attempts were disasters, but Thomas ate burned eggs and lumpy porridge without complaint, assuring her that practice would improve her skills. He was right. Within a week, she was producing edible meals, and within 2, she was actually becoming a decent cook. Thomas taught her to ride on Copper, patient and encouraging as she learned to manage the gentle mare. The first time she cantered across the open grassland with the wind in her face and the prairie stretching endlessly around her, Catherine laughed aloud with pure joy. Thomas rode beside her on Dakota, grinning at her delight, and in that moment, something shifted between them, some invisible barrier beginning to dissolve. They worked together on everything, mending fences, moving cattle, harvesting the last of the garden vegetables, preparing the ranch for winter. Thomas never asked her to do anything he would not do himself, often taking on the harder or more unpleasant tasks. When she protested, he simply said that they were partners, and partners looked out for each other. The evenings became Catherine's favorite time. After supper, they would sit by the fireplace, and Thomas would read aloud from his small collection of books while Catherine mended clothes or worked on knitting projects. His voice was soothing, and she found herself looking forward to these quiet hours of companionship. Sometimes they talked instead, sharing stories from their pasts, dreams for the future, opinions on everything from politics to the best way to bake bread. Thomas made her laugh, which astonished her. She had forgotten what real laughter felt like, the kind that came from genuine amusement rather than nervous fear. He told absurd stories about his early days on the ranch, when he had known nothing about cattle or horses and had made every possible mistake. He did impressions of pompous townsfolk that were so accurate Catherine had to hold her sides from laughing. And slowly, gradually, she felt the constant tension in her shoulders begin to ease. A month after their wedding, Catherine woke to the first snow of winter, fat flakes drifting past her window and coating the prairie in white. She dressed quickly and emerged to find Thomas stoking the fire, already dressed for outdoor work. "Good morning," he greeted her with the warm smile that had become familiar. "I need to check on the cattle and make sure they have access to the creek. The temperature dropped sharply last night. Would you mind tending to the chickens and horses?" "Of course not." She bundled into the warm coat Thomas had bought her in town the week before, insisting she would need it for the coming winter, and headed out into the crystalline morning. The world looked magical under its blanket of snow, clean and new. The chickens were huddled in their coop, ruffled and annoyed by the cold, but they came running when she scattered their feed. The horses nickered greetings, their breath steaming in the frigid air. Catherine was finishing up when she heard hoofbeats approaching fast. She looked up to see Thomas riding hard toward the barn on Dakota, and her heart lurched with immediate fear that something was wrong. But when he dismounted, she saw excitement on his face rather than concern. "Catherine, come quickly. I want to show you something." He helped her onto Copper and swung back up onto Dakota, leading them out across the snow-covered prairie at a brisk trot. About half a mile from the house, he stopped near a small stand of cottonwood trees by the creek. In the shelter of the trees, partially hidden by brush, a cow stood over something small and dark. "She gave birth this morning," Thomas said quietly. "A bull calf, strong and healthy despite the cold. I wanted you to see." They dismounted and approached slowly. The cow eyed them warily but did not move away. She knew Thomas and trusted him. The calf was still wobbly on its legs, its coat dark and curly, its eyes bright with new life. It bawled softly, and its mother lowered her head to nuzzle it reassuringly. "He is beautiful," Catherine breathed. "First calf of the season. It is a good sign, a healthy birth like this. The herd will grow strong this year." Thomas's voice was full of quiet pride. "I wanted to share this with you. New life, new beginnings. It seemed fitting for us." Catherine looked at him, this man who had shown her nothing but kindness and patience, who had given her safety and respect and the space to heal. "Thomas, I want to thank you again for everything you have done for me. I arrived here expecting the worst, braced for cruelty. Instead, you have shown me tenderness I did not know existed. You have given me a home and freedom and, I think, friendship." "You have given me the same," Thomas said softly. This house was just a structure before you came. Now it is a home. The work was just labor. Now it is shared purpose. And yes, Catherine, you have my friendship and my respect, and you always will." They stood together in the snow, watching the cow tend to her calf, and Catherine felt something bloom in her chest, warm and tentative and precious. It took her a moment to recognize the feeling as happiness. As winter deepened, the ranch became a small world unto itself, isolated by snow and cold from the town and neighbors. Thomas and Catherine developed an easy domesticity that felt natural despite the unusual circumstances of their marriage. They worked together, ate together, spent long evenings by the fire together. Catherine found herself watching Thomas when he was not looking, noticing the way his hands moved with such careful strength, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the way he hummed tunelessly while he worked on repairs in the barn. She was falling in love with her husband, and the realization terrified her. Love meant vulnerability. Love meant giving someone the power to hurt you. Every instinct Catherine had developed over years of survival told her to protect her heart, to maintain distance, to remember that trust was dangerous. But her heart seemed determined to ignore all those sensible warnings. Thomas, for his part, seemed content with their arrangement. He never pushed for more than Catherine was ready to give, never expressed frustration with their separate sleeping arrangements, never demanded the rights that were legally his as her husband. His patience was inexhaustible, his kindness unwavering. Catherine began to wonder if perhaps he saw her only as a friend and partner, if the romantic love she was beginning to feel was one-sided. The thought brought an ache to her chest that surprised her with its intensity. When had his good opinion become so important? When had his smile become the thing that brightened her whole day on Christmas Eve? Thomas surprised her by producing a small package wrapped in brown paper. "I know we agreed not to exchange gifts," he said, looking almost shy, "but I saw this in town and I thought of you." Catherine unwrapped it carefully to find a book of poetry, the binding new and the pages crisp. She opened the cover and saw an inscription in Thomas's careful handwriting. "To Catherine, who brought light and life to this lonely ranch. With affection and respect, Thomas. Christmas, 1897. Tears blurred her vision. "Thomas, this is beautiful, but I have nothing for you. You have given me more than you know," he said quietly. "Your company, your laughter, your presence in this home, those are gifts beyond price." Catherine looked up at him, this good man who had saved her from a life of fear and pain, and something broke loose inside her. "Thomas, I need to tell you something." "What is it?" His concern was immediate and he stepped closer. "Are you unhappy? Do you need something?" "Whatever it is, we can address it." "I am not unhappy. I am the opposite of unhappy, and that is what frightens me." The words tumbled out before she could stop them. "I came here expecting a transaction, a business arrangement. I thought I would be a servant or worse. Instead, you have treated me with more kindness than I have ever known. You have given me freedom and safety and respect. And somewhere along the way, I began to care for you in a way that goes beyond gratitude or friendship. I think I am falling in love with you, Thomas Irwin, and I do not know if that is something you want or welcome, but I cannot keep it inside anymore." Thomas stood frozen, his eyes wide with shock. For a terrible moment, Catherine thought she had made a catastrophic mistake, that she had ruined the comfortable partnership they had built. Then Thomas closed the distance between them in 2 long strides and cupped her face gently in his work-roughened hands. "Catherine, I have been in love with you since the day you laughed while riding Copper across the prairie. Maybe before that. I have been trying so hard to be patient, to give you time, to not pressure you for anything you were not ready to give. But God, I have wanted to tell you how I feel every single day." "Then why did you not?" Catherine whispered, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. "Because I wanted you to come to me freely if you came at all. I wanted you to choose me, not feel obligated because of our circumstances. You have had so many choices taken from you in your life, Catherine. I wanted this to be yours." "I choose you," Catherine said, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. "I choose you, Thomas. I choose this life and this home and this future with you." Thomas leaned down and kissed her, and this time there was nothing chaste about it. This was a kiss of love and longing, tender and passionate and full of promise. Catherine melted into him, her arms coming up to wrap around his neck, and for the first time in her life, she felt truly safe in a man's embrace. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Thomas rested his forehead against hers. "Are you sure, Catherine? I need you to be sure." "I have never been more sure of anything." "Then come with me." Thomas took her hand and led her to his bedroom, pulling back the heavy quilt on the large bed he had slept in alone for so long. "If you want to stop at any time, just say so. Your comfort matters more than anything else to me." But Catherine did not want to stop. She wanted to be close to this man who had shown her what love could be, who had been patient and kind and gentle when the world had taught her to expect nothing but cruelty. Their coming together was tender and unhurried, Thomas taking time to make sure she felt cherished and safe. Catherine had expected pain and awkwardness, but instead, she found wonder and connection, the physical expression of the emotional bond they had been building for months. Afterward, they lay tangled together under the quilts, the winter wind howling outside while the fire crackled in the main room. Thomas held her close, pressing kisses to her hair, murmuring endearments that made her heart swell. "I want you to know something," Thomas said into the quiet darkness. "I did not send for a mail-order bride because I wanted a servant or because I viewed women as property. I sent for you because I genuinely wanted a partner, someone to share this life with. But I got so much more than I hoped for. I got you, Catherine. And I will spend the rest of my life being grateful for that." "I got more than I hoped for too," Catherine said, tracing patterns on his chest with her fingertips. "I got safety and respect and love. I got a home. I got you. Always," Thomas promised. "You have me always." They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, and for the first time in either of their memories, neither felt alone. Winter passed in a haze of happiness that Catherine had never imagined possible. She moved her few possessions into Thomas's room, and they spent their nights learning each other's bodies and hearts with equal care. During the day, they worked the ranch together, a true partnership in every sense. Thomas taught her everything he knew about managing cattle and horses, and Catherine proved to be a quick learner with good instincts for the work. The isolation of winter did not feel lonely anymore. Instead, it felt intimate, the two of them in their own private world of snow and firelight and growing love. They talked for hours about everything and nothing, learning all the small details that made up a life. Catherine discovered that Thomas loved music, but could not carry a tune, that he had a terrible sweet tooth, that he got adorably grumpy if he did not get enough sleep. Thomas learned that Catherine could sketch beautifully, that she was afraid of spiders but fearless around cattle, that she got a small dimple in her left cheek when she smiled genuinely. Spring arrived slowly, the snow melting to reveal the prairie grasslands beginning to green. The cattle grew restless, and there was a burst of activity as new calves were born. Catherine helped with the births, proving to have a calm hand and steady nerves even when complications arose. Thomas watched her bring a breech calf into the world, her arms covered in blood and birth fluids, her face determined and focused, and fell in love with her all over again. In April, They made the trip into Enid for supplies, their first visit to town since winter. Catherine had been nervous about facing people, worried about judgment or gossip regarding their unconventional marriage. But Thomas held her hand as they walked down the main street, pride evident in every line of his body, and the townspeople greeted them warmly. Margaret Sullivan from the boarding house hugged Catherine and declared she had never seen anyone look so well and happy. Reverend Matthews shook Thomas's hand and commented that marriage clearly agreed with them both. At the general store, while Thomas discussed a bulk grain order with the proprietor, Catherine browsed the limited selection of yard goods and notions. She was examining a bolt of blue calico when a woman about her own age approached, blonde and pretty in an expensive dress that marked her as someone of means. "You must be Mrs. Irwin," the woman said with a genuine smile. "I am Sarah Prescott. My husband owns the bank in town. I wanted to introduce myself and welcome you to Enid properly." "Thank you, that is very kind." Catherine was still learning to accept kindness without suspicion. "Thomas is a good man," Sarah said. "One of the most respected ranchers in the area. You are very fortunate." "I know," Catherine said, meaning it with her whole heart. "I am more fortunate than I ever imagined I could be." Sarah invited them to dinner the following week, and soon Catherine found herself welcomed into the small community of ranch wives in the area. These women were tough and practical, used to hard work and isolation, and they accepted Catherine as one of their own. She learned recipes and ranching tips, heard gossip and news, and slowly built friendships that enriched her new life. Summer brought long days of hard work, moving cattle to better grazing, mending fences, and preparing for the fall when some of the herd would be sold. Catherine worked alongside Thomas from dawn until dusk, her skin tanning despite her bonnet, her muscles growing strong from the physical labor. She had never felt healthier or more alive. One evening in July, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors, Thomas pulled Catherine into his lap and held her close. "I have been thinking," he said. "This ranch is doing well, better than I hoped. The herd is strong and we are turning a good profit. I was thinking we might expand, perhaps buy the neighboring section if it comes up for sale. Build our holdings for the future." "That sounds wonderful," Catherine said, resting her head on his shoulder. "For our children's future," Thomas continued, and Catherine felt her breath catch. "If we are blessed with children, I would like to leave them something substantial, a legacy." "Thomas Irwin, are you saying you want to have children with me?" Catherine pulled back to look at his face. "Of course I do. I want everything with you, Catherine. Children, grandchildren, a whole life together, unless you do not want that. We have never discussed it, and I should have asked rather than assumed." "I want that," Catherine said, emotion making her voice thick. "I want your children and our future and everything that comes with it. I just never let myself hope for it. Even now, sometimes I wake up afraid this is all a dream, that I will find myself back in Philadelphia with my brother." "You are never going back there. This is real, Catherine. We are real, and we are building something lasting together." Thomas kissed her deeply, and Catherine lost herself in his touch, in the promise of their shared future. As summer turned to fall, Catherine began to suspect she might be carrying their first child. She waited to be certain before telling Thomas, not wanting to raise his hopes prematurely. But when she missed her monthly courses for the second time and began experiencing morning nausea, she could no longer deny the truth. She told him one evening in late September as they prepared for bed. Thomas was brushing out his hair when Catherine said quietly, "I think I am with child." He froze, the brush dropping from his suddenly nerveless fingers. "Are you certain?" "As certain as I can be without seeing a doctor. All the signs are there." Thomas crossed the room in 2 strides and swept her up in his arms, spinning her around despite her laughing protests. "Catherine, we are going to have a baby. Put me down, you fool, before you make me dizzy." He set her down but kept his arms around her, his face split in the widest grin she had ever seen. "When? How are you feeling? Do you need anything? Should we go to town to see the doctor? Probably in March, based on my calculations. I feel fine, just tired and queasy in the mornings. And yes, we should see the doctor soon to make sure everything is well." That night, Thomas held her with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes, his hand resting protectively over her still flat belly. "I am going to be a father," he kept saying, wonder in his voice. "We are going to be parents." "Are you happy?" Catherine asked, though she could see that he was. Happy does not begin to cover it. "I am blessed beyond measure. A year ago, I was alone in this house, lonely and unsure if I would ever find someone to share my life with. Now I have you, and soon we will have a child. How did I get so fortunate?" "We both got fortunate," Catherine said softly. "I was so afraid when I got off that stagecoach. I expected cruelty and found tenderness instead. You changed my life, Thomas. You showed me what love is supposed to be." They made the trip to town a few days later, and Dr. Morrison confirmed what Catherine already knew. She was indeed expecting, healthy and progressing normally, due to deliver in early spring. The doctor gave her instructions for maintaining her health and told Thomas to make sure she did not overwork herself. "She is pregnant, not fragile," the doctor said with a smile. "Light work is fine and probably good for her. Just use common sense." Thomas took the instructions seriously, perhaps too seriously. He began to hover, worried about Catherine lifting anything heavy or working too hard. It was endearing but also occasionally frustrating. "I am perfectly capable of gathering eggs," Catherine protested one morning when Thomas tried to take the basket from her hands. "I know, but what if you slip? What if you strain yourself? Then I will be more careful." "Thomas, I appreciate your concern, but you cannot wrap me in cotton wool for the next 6 months. I will go mad from boredom." They compromised, Catherine continuing to do most of her usual tasks while Thomas took over the heavier work. As fall progressed, and the weather grew colder, they prepared for another winter. This time with the excitement of the coming baby adding an extra layer of anticipation to everything they did. Thomas spent his evenings building a cradle from cottonwood, sanding it until it was smooth as silk, carving small decorations into the sides. Catherine sewed tiny gowns and blankets, her heart swelling with love for the child she had not yet met. They talked endlessly about names, about what kind of parents they wanted to be, about the future they would build for their growing family. Winter came again, and Catherine's belly swelled with their child. Thomas was attentive and affectionate, constantly asking how she felt, rubbing her aching back, making sure she stayed warm and well fed. As her body changed, Catherine occasionally felt self-conscious, but Thomas made it clear that he found her more beautiful than ever, that watching her carry their child filled him with pride and love. On a frigid night in early March, Catherine's labor began. Thomas rode through the darkness to fetch the doctor, pushing Dakota hard despite the dangerous conditions. Dr. Morrison arrived to find Catherine pacing the main room, breathing through contractions with grim determination. The labor was long and difficult. Catherine had known childbirth would be painful, but the reality exceeded her expectations. For hours, she struggled while Thomas held her hand and whispered encouragement, his face pale with worry. "Doctor." Morrison remained calm and professional, checking her progress and assuring them both that everything was proceeding normally, if slowly. Finally, as dawn broke over the prairie, Catherine gave a final push and their son entered the world, red-faced and squalling with outrage. "Doctor." Morrison cleaned him quickly and placed him in Catherine's arms, and she looked down at the tiny, perfect face of her baby and felt her heart expand beyond what she thought possible. "A son," Thomas breathed, tears streaming down his face as he looked at his child. "We have a son." "He is perfect," Catherine whispered. "Absolutely perfect." They named him Matthew Thomas Irwin, Matthew for the reverend who had married them and Thomas for his father. Little Matthew was a healthy baby with a good set of lungs and his father's dark hair. Thomas was besotted from the first moment, spending hours simply watching his son sleep, holding him with careful reverence, talking to him in a soft voice about the ranch and the cattle and everything they would do together. Catherine recovered slowly from the birth, and Thomas took over running the household in addition to managing the ranch, working himself to exhaustion to make sure both she and the baby had everything they needed. Catherine found herself falling in love with him all over again, watching him care for their son with such tenderness and patience. Matthew was 3 months old when Catherine finally felt like herself again, her strength returned and her body healing. It was a warm June evening, and she had just put the baby down to sleep in his cradle when Thomas came in from the evening chores. He found her standing by the cradle, watching their son sleep, and came to stand behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "What are you thinking about?" he asked softly. "About how different my life is now compared to what I expected. When I stepped off that stagecoach in Enid almost 2 years ago, I was terrified. I thought I was trading one form of captivity for another. Instead, I found freedom and love and happiness. I found home." "I found home too," Thomas said, resting his chin on top of her head. "I had a house and land, but it was not a home until you arrived. You brought life and light and love to this place. You gave me a family. I wake up every morning grateful that you answered my advertisement, that you were brave enough to take a chance on a stranger." "Best decision I ever made," Catherine said, turning in his arms to face him. "You are the best man I have ever known, Thomas Irwin. You have given me everything I never knew I needed." They kissed as the sunset painted the sky outside their window, their son sleeping peacefully nearby, and Catherine thought about how miraculous it was that love had found her in this unlikely place. She had expected cruelty and found tenderness. She had expected to be used and found herself cherished. She had expected to survive and instead had learned to truly live. The years that followed were full and rich, challenging in the way that all worthwhile lives are challenging, but deeply satisfying. The ranch prospered under their joint management, their herd growing until Thomas was able to buy the adjoining section of land he had wanted, expanding their holdings significantly. They hired a young man named Peter to help with the work, and he proved to be reliable and hardworking, eventually building his own small house on the far edge of the property. Matthew grew into a sturdy, curious boy with his father's dark hair and his mother's hazel eyes. He toddled after Thomas whenever allowed, wanting to help with every task, chattering constantly in the way of small children. Thomas was an attentive, loving father, patient with his son's questions and always willing to explain how things worked. When Matthew was 2, Catherine became pregnant again, and in the spring of 1900, she delivered a daughter they named Grace Margaret Irwin. Grace for its meaning and Margaret for the kind woman who had welcomed Catherine to Enid on her first frightening day. Grace was a calm baby, content to watch the world with serious blue eyes, and Matthew was enchanted with his little sister, wanting to help with everything related to her care. The new century brought changes to the Oklahoma Territory. Enid grew larger and more prosperous, new settlers arriving regularly to claim land and build homes. The Irwins became pillars of the community, respected for their hard work and integrity. Catherine joined the Ladies' Auxiliary at the church and helped organize community events. Thomas served on the town council and advocated for better roads and schools. Their home was often full of guests, neighboring ranchers and their families, friends from town, circuit preachers who needed a place to stay. Catherine discovered she enjoyed hospitality, taking pleasure in setting a good table and making people feel welcome. Thomas thrived on the social interaction, telling stories and debating politics with the easy confidence of a man secure in his place in the world. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Thomas gave Catherine a beautiful bay mare he had been training especially for her. "You have become an excellent rider," he said as he led the horse from the barn. "You deserve a horse of your own, one that is truly yours." Catherine named her Willow for her graceful movements, and the mare became her constant companion on rides across the prairie. Sometimes Catherine would ride out alone, needing space to think or simply to enjoy the vast beauty of the land. Thomas never questioned her need for these solitary rides, understanding that everyone needed time alone with their thoughts. Other times, they would ride together in the evenings after the children were asleep and Peter was watching the house, racing across the grasslands like they had when Catherine was first learning to ride, laughing and free. They would stop by the creek where Thomas had first shown her the newborn calf, and he would spread a blanket, and they would lie together watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky, talking about their dreams and plans. In the fall of 1901, Catherine discovered she was pregnant again. This pregnancy was harder than the previous two, leaving her more tired and nauseous. Thomas worried constantly, but Catherine assured him she was fine, just uncomfortable. Their 3rd child, a son they named James Robert Irwin, was born in April of 1902 after a relatively quick labor. James was a lusty, energetic baby from the start, and he kept them both exhausted with his nighttime wakings and constant need for attention. "He is going to be a handful," Thomas predicted, walking the floor at 2 in the morning with his crying son. "Look at that temper." "He takes after his father," Catherine teased from the bed, too tired to help much. "I do not have a temper," Thomas protested, then laughed at himself. All right, perhaps occasionally. Despite the exhaustion, they were happy. Their family felt complete, their home full of life and laughter and the chaos that came with small children. Catherine sometimes thought back to her life in Philadelphia and could hardly believe that terrified young woman had been her. She had grown so much, become so much stronger and more confident. Thomas's love had given her the foundation to become the person she was always meant to be. Matthew started attending the school in Enid when he turned 6, riding into town with Thomas in the wagon, and coming home full of stories about his lessons and new friends. Grace was content to stay home, helping Catherine around the house and playing with her baby brother. The age differences between the children meant they were at different stages, requiring different types of attention, and Catherine found herself constantly busy but deeply fulfilled. In 1904, Oklahoma Territory was moving toward statehood, and there was excitement and optimism about the future. Thomas became more involved in local politics, working with other ranchers and businessmen to advocate for the territory's interests. Catherine supported his involvement, taking on more of the ranch management during the times when meetings required him to be away from home. She had become an accomplished rancher in her own right, able to handle calving, manage the books, and make decisions about buying and selling cattle. Thomas trusted her judgment completely, often consulting her before making major decisions. They were true partners in every sense, and their mutual respect and love had only deepened over the years. On a warm summer evening in 1905, the family gathered on the porch after supper, the children playing in the yard while Thomas and Catherine sat together on the swing Thomas had built and hung from the porch rafters. Matthew was chasing lightning bugs, Grace was making chains from prairie grass, and James was digging in the dirt with the single-minded focus of a 4-year-old. "Can you believe it has been 8 years since we married?" Catherine said, watching their children play. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday. Other times it feels like you have always been here." Thomas took her hand, lacing their fingers together. "I cannot imagine my life without you, Catherine. You are my partner, my best friend, the love of my life." "You saved me," Catherine said softly. "I truly mean that. I was drowning in Philadelphia and you threw me a lifeline. You gave me everything, a home, a family, a purpose. You showed me what love is supposed to be, what marriage can be when built on respect and trust." "You saved me too," Thomas insisted. "I was lonely and isolated, wondering if I would spend my whole life alone. You brought joy and warmth and life to this ranch. You gave me children and laughter and love. We saved each other, Catherine." They sat together as twilight deepened, watching their children play, and Catherine felt a profound sense of peace and gratitude. Her life had not been easy, but it had led her here, to this man and this place and this family. Every hardship she had endured had been worth it to arrive at this moment. The years continued to pass, each bringing its own challenges and triumphs. There were hard winters when they worried about the cattle, dry summers when the grass turned brown and water became scarce, years when cattle prices dropped and money was tight. But they faced everything together, supporting each other through difficult times and celebrating together during good ones. Matthew grew into a serious, responsible boy who loved the ranch and showed every sign of wanting to follow in his father's footsteps. Grace was artistic and dreamy, always drawing or making up stories, bringing a different kind of energy to their practical household. James was wild and adventurous, constantly getting into trouble but so charming that it was hard to stay angry with him. Thomas was patient with all their children, firm but fair, quick to praise and slow to punish. He taught them about the ranch, about honor and honesty and hard work. Catherine taught them reading and arithmetic, baking and sewing, the practical skills they would need to navigate the world. Together, they worked to raise children who were capable and confident, prepared for whatever life might bring. In November of 1907, Oklahoma finally achieved statehood, and there were celebrations throughout the region. Thomas took the whole family to Enid for the ceremony, where they joined their neighbors in marking the historic occasion. The children were thrilled by the festivities, and Catherine felt a surge of pride for their adopted home, this place that had given them so much. That winter, Margaret Sullivan passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 73. Catherine attended the funeral and wept for the kind woman who had welcomed her so warmly on her first night in Enid. Thomas held her afterward, understanding her grief even though he said nothing, just offering the comfort of his presence. "She was one of the first people to show me kindness here," Catherine said through her tears. "I will never forget that. Her kindness helped make you feel welcome, helped you settle into your new life. That was a gift beyond price." They returned home and held their children a little tighter that night, reminded of how precious and fragile life could be. Catherine looked at her family gathered around the dinner table, at Thomas serving stew and the children chattering about their day, and felt overwhelming gratitude for every moment they had together. As the children grew older, the dynamics of the household shifted. Matthew took on more responsibility around the ranch, working alongside Thomas and Peter to manage the growing herd. Grace helped Catherine more in the house, learning to cook and sew and manage a household. James remained a handful, but even he began to settle down as he got older, channeling his energy into helping with the horses. In 1910, when Matthew was 13, he asked his parents if he could raise his own small herd of cattle, buying young steers with money he had saved from helping neighboring ranchers with various tasks. Thomas agreed, helping his son select healthy animals and teaching him about managing his own small enterprise. Matthew approached the project with characteristic seriousness, keeping meticulous records and making careful decisions. Thomas watched his son with pride, recognizing that Matthew had the skills and temperament to become an excellent rancher. Grace, at 11, was becoming a talented artist. She filled sketchbooks with drawings of the prairie, the cattle, and her family, capturing small moments with surprising skill. Catherine cherished these drawings, having several framed and hung around the house. When a teacher in Enid mentioned that Grace might benefit from formal art instruction, Thomas and Catherine discussed sending her to a boarding school in Oklahoma City that offered such programs. Grace, however, was adamant that she did not want to leave the ranch or her family. "I can learn on my own," she insisted. "I do not need to go away to school. Please do not make me go." They agreed to let her stay home, ordering art instruction books and supplies so she could continue developing her talent. Grace threw herself into her studies, improving rapidly, and Catherine was glad they had listened to their daughter's wishes rather than forcing her into a situation she did not want. James, at 9, remained their wild child, always climbing something or getting into minor trouble. But he had a gift with animals, particularly horses. He could calm even the most skittish horse, approaching them with an instinctive understanding that could not be taught. Thomas began letting James help more with training the young horses, and the boy proved to have real talent. "Each of our children is so different," Catherine marveled one evening. "Matthew is steady and serious, Grace is artistic and dreamy, and James is wild and intuitive. How did we get so lucky?" "They each got the best parts of both of us," Thomas said. "Matthew has your careful planning and my work ethic. Grace has your appreciation for beauty and my stubbornness. James has your courage and my temper." "I am not sure James having your temper is a good thing," Catherine said with a laugh. "Fair point. We will probably have trouble with that boy before he grows out of it." But the trouble, when it came, was minor: scraped knees, torn clothes, the occasional fight with other boys. Nothing that time and maturity would not cure. Their children were good kids, growing into good young people, and both Thomas and Catherine took pride in that. The ranch continued to prosper. Thomas was recognized as one of the most successful cattlemen in the region, known for the quality of his herd and the fairness of his business dealings. He had opportunities to expand even further, to buy more land and grow the operation larger, but he chose instead to maintain their current size, prioritizing quality of life over endless growth. "We have enough," he told Catherine. "More than enough. I would rather spend my evenings with my family than constantly chasing expansion. What is the point of building an empire if you are too busy to enjoy it?" Catherine agreed wholeheartedly. They had a comfortable life, enough money for necessities and some luxuries, and most importantly, time to spend together as a family. That was worth more than all the land in Oklahoma. In 1913, a traveling photographer came through Enid, and Thomas arranged for a family portrait. They dressed in their best clothes and posed together on the porch of their home. Thomas standing tall and proud with his hand on Catherine's shoulder, Catherine seated with James on her lap, Matthew and Grace standing on either side. The resulting photograph captured a moment in time, a record of their family at this particular stage of their lives. Catherine kept the photograph on the mantel, looking at it often and marveling at how much they had all changed. Matthew was nearly as tall as his father now, broadening through the shoulders, his face losing its childish roundness. Grace was becoming a lovely young woman, though still gangly and awkward in the way of adolescence. James had lost some of his baby roundness, growing lean and energetic. And she and Thomas were both graying at the temples, lines appearing around their eyes and mouths, marks of a life fully lived. They were not young anymore, but Catherine thought they looked happy, and that was what mattered most. That summer, a severe drought struck the region, the worst anyone could remember. The prairie grass turned brown and brittle, creeks dried up, and cattle began to suffer from lack of water and forage. Thomas made the difficult decision to sell off part of the herd rather than watch them starve, taking a loss financially but preserving the health of the animals that remained. Other ranchers were not so fortunate. Several families lost everything and had to leave their land, defeated by the harsh conditions. The Irwins helped where they could, sharing water when they had it to spare, buying cattle from neighbors at fair prices to give them capital to survive. It was a hard year, testing everyone's endurance and resolve, but finally, in late September, the rains came. Catherine stood on the porch and watched the clouds roll in, great dark thunderheads that unleashed torrential rain on the parched land. She stepped out into the downpour, lifting her face to the sky, letting the rain soak her completely. Thomas joined her, and they stood together in the storm, laughing with relief and joy. The children came running out too, splashing in the rapidly forming puddles, whooping and dancing in the rain. The whole family stood together in the life-giving storm, celebrating the end of the drought and the promise of recovery. The ranch did recover, though it took time. The grass grew back, the cattle regained their weight, and slowly their finances stabilized. Thomas and Catherine worked harder than ever, putting in long days to rebuild what they had lost. But they had weathered the crisis together, their partnership as strong as ever, and Catherine knew that whatever challenges came, they would face them united. In 1915, Matthew turned 18 and announced his intention to attend the agricultural college in Stillwater for a year to learn modern ranching techniques. Thomas was surprised but pleased, proud that his son wanted to bring new knowledge back to the family ranch. They sent Matthew off with their blessing, and the house felt strangely empty without his steady presence. Grace, at 16, had grown into a beautiful young woman with her mother's hazel eyes and her father's dark hair. She had several young men interested in courting her, but she showed no interest in any of them, preferring to spend her time drawing and helping around the ranch. Catherine did not push, remembering her own youth and how little control she had had over her own life. If Grace wanted to wait for marriage or not marry at all, that was her choice to make. James, at 14, was finally beginning to settle down, his wild energy channeling into productive work with the horses. He had a way with them that was almost magical, and Thomas began to think that James might make his living as a horse trainer rather than a cattleman. Whatever James chose, his parents would support him. On their 18th wedding anniversary, Thomas surprised Catherine by taking her to Oklahoma City for a week, leaving the children in Peter's capable care. They stayed in a real hotel with electric lights and indoor plumbing, ate in restaurants, attended a play at the theater, and spent a week simply enjoying each other's company without the demands of the ranch. "This is wonderful," Catherine said as they walked through the city streets, her arm linked through Thomas's. "But I find myself missing home." "So do I," Thomas admitted. "The city is exciting for a visit, but the prairie is where I belong, where we belong." They returned home after a week, both glad to be back on their own land, surrounded by their family. The city was impressive, but it could not compare to the life they had built together. The years from 1915 to 1920 brought continued growth and change. Matthew returned from college full of ideas about scientific ranching, introducing some new techniques that improved the herd's health and productivity. Grace finally accepted the courtship of a young rancher named Daniel Foster from a neighboring property, and they married in a lovely ceremony at the church in Enid when Grace was 19. James completed his schooling and began training horses professionally, gaining a reputation for his skill. Thomas and Catherine became grandparents when Grace and Daniel welcomed a daughter in 1919. Holding her granddaughter for the first time, Catherine was overwhelmed with emotion, thinking about the long journey that had brought her to this moment. From that terrified young woman stepping off the stage-coach to this, a grandmother, a successful rancher's wife, a woman with a loving family and a satisfying life. "What are you thinking about?" Thomas asked, watching her cradle their granddaughter. "About how far we have come. About how different my life is from what I expected. About how grateful I am for every moment. No regrets, not a single one. Answering your advertisement was the best decision I ever made. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Thomas Irwin." "And you are the best thing that ever happened to me, Catherine Irwin." They stood together in their daughter's home, admiring their granddaughter, and Catherine thought about that first Christmas when she had confessed her love to Thomas. When he had told her she had brought light and life to his lonely ranch. She had never imagined then that their love story would span decades, producing children and grandchildren, building not just a ranch but a legacy of love and partnership. As the 1920s began, Thomas and Catherine were in their late 40s, no longer young but still vigorous and healthy. The ranch was thriving, their children were successfully establishing their own lives, and they had the satisfaction of knowing they had built something lasting. Matthew was running much of the day-to-day operations now, allowing Thomas to slow down slightly, though he still worked hard every day. Catherine had developed a successful business selling eggs and butter in town, contributing to the family income while pursuing something that was her own project. On quiet evenings, they still sat together on the porch swing, watching the sunset paint the prairie in brilliant colors. They talked about their children and grandchildren, about plans for the ranch, about current events, about nothing in particular. Sometimes they sat in comfortable silence, just enjoying each other's presence. "You remember the day you arrived in Enid?" Thomas asked one evening. "Of course." "I was terrified. I thought I was stepping into another form of captivity. And instead, I found freedom, I found love, I found home. You gave me all of that, Thomas. You showed me tenderness I never knew existed. You gave me just as much. You turned a house into a home, a ranch into a family legacy. You gave me children and love and purpose. We built this life together, Catherine. Yes, we did, together, and I would not change a single thing." They sat together as darkness fell, two people who had taken a chance on each other and found everything they had been searching for. Catherine thought about the young woman who had stepped off that stagecoach 23 years earlier, expecting cruelty and finding tenderness instead. That woman had been so afraid, so broken by her experiences, convinced that kindness was a lie men told before revealing their true natures. But Thomas had proven her wrong in the best possible way. He had been patient when she needed patience, gentle when she needed gentleness, strong when she needed strength. He had given her space to heal and time to learn to trust again. He had shown her, day by day and year by year, what real love looked like. Not grand gestures or pretty words, but consistent kindness, unwavering support, and deep respect. Their love story was not the dramatic romance of novels, but something quieter and more profound. It was built on small moments. Morning coffee drunk together in the kitchen, hands touching as they worked side by side, quiet conversations in the darkness before sleep. It was built on shared struggles overcome, joys celebrated together, a life constructed with care and intention. As they aged together, their love only deepened. They knew each other completely, all the strengths and flaws and quirks that made up a whole person. They had weathered storms, literal and figurative, had built something that would outlast them both in their children and grandchildren. Matthew married a sweet young woman named Ellen, and they began their own family. James eventually wed a spirited rancher's daughter who shared his love of horses. The Irwin family grew, expanded, became a force in the community. And at the center of it all were Thomas and Catherine, the patriarch and matriarch who had started it all with a mail-order bride advertisement and a leap of faith. When asked for advice by their children or young couples in town, Catherine always said the same thing. Marriage is a partnership built on respect and trust. Choose someone who treats you well even when it is difficult. Choose someone who sees you as an equal. Choose kindness over passion, because passion fades but kindness endures. Thomas's advice was simpler. Find someone you like as much as you love. Life is too long to spend it with someone you cannot talk to. They practiced what they preached, maintaining their friendship and partnership even as they aged. They still laughed together, still worked together, still looked forward to their evenings together. The physical passion of their early years had mellowed into something deeper, a profound comfort and security in each other's presence. In 1925, Thomas and Catherine celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary with a large gathering of family and friends. Their children and grandchildren filled the house, spilling out onto the porch and yard. Friends from town and neighboring ranches came to celebrate with them. Reverend Matthews, now elderly but still sharp, gave a blessing, noting that the Irwins were an example of what marriage should be. As Catherine looked around at the gathered crowd, at the life they had built together, she felt tears prick her eyes. 30 years ago, she had arrived in Enid expecting the worst and finding the best instead. 30 years ago, she had married a stranger who became her best friend, her partner, the great love of her life. "What are you thinking?" Thomas asked, coming to stand beside her with his arm around her waist. "That I am the luckiest woman alive. That I love you more than words can express. That every day with you has been a gift." "The luck was all mine," Thomas said. "I advertised for a mail-order bride and got a partner, a friend, a lover, the mother of my children and the love of my life. I got you, Catherine, and that was more than I ever deserved." "You deserved everything good, Thomas. You are the best man I have ever known." They kissed, unashamed of the public display, and their children cheered and applauded. Catherine laughed, hiding her face in Thomas's shoulder, but she was happy. So deeply, profoundly happy. As the sun set on their anniversary celebration, painting the Oklahoma sky in shades of gold and crimson, Catherine stood beside her husband and watched their family and friends enjoying themselves on their land. This was the life she had helped build, the legacy they would leave behind. Not just a successful ranch, but a family bound by love, a testament to what could be created when two people chose to see the best in each other. She had arrived expecting cruelty and found tenderness. She had expected to simply survive and instead had learned to truly live. She had expected nothing and received everything. And it had all started with a leap of faith, a stagecoach ride to an unknown town, and a cowboy with kind eyes who had promised she would be safe. Thomas had kept that promise every day for 30 years. He had shown her what love could be, what marriage should be. He had given her a home, a family, a purpose, and most importantly, the freedom to become herself. Catherine had arrived in Enid broken and afraid, and Thomas had helped her heal and grow and become strong. Now, 3 decades later, she stood secure in herself and her place in the world, surrounded by evidence of the life they had built together. She was Thomas Irwin, beloved wife, mother, and grandmother, successful rancher and pillar of her community. She was happy, genuinely and completely happy, and it was all because she had been brave enough to answer an advertisement from a lonely rancher seeking a partner. Sometimes, late at night when she could not sleep, Catherine still thought about that terrified young woman who had stepped off the stagecoach so many years ago. She wished she could go back and tell that woman that everything would be all right, that the fear and pain would fade, that joy and love were waiting just ahead. But of course, she could not. All she could do was live the life she had been given, love the man she had married, and be grateful for every moment. And she was grateful. Every single day, she woke up grateful for the life she lived, the family she had, and the man sleeping beside her who had shown her that tenderness existed, that love was real, that happy endings were possible even for those who had suffered. The mail-order bride had become a beloved wife. The frightened girl had become a strong woman. The lonely cowboy had become a devoted husband and father. And together, they had built something beautiful that would last long after they were gone, a legacy of love and partnership and faith in each other. As the stars emerged in the darkening sky and the last guests departed, Thomas and Catherine stood together on their porch, just as they had done countless times over the years. They did not need words anymore. They could communicate in glances and touches in the comfortable silence of 2 people who knew each other completely. "Ready for bed?" Thomas asked finally. "Yes, I am tired. It was a wonderful day, though. The best. 30 years, Catherine. 30 years of marriage, and I love you more now than I did the day we wed." "I love you too. More than I can say. Thank you for everything, Thomas. Thank you for saving me, for loving me, for building this life with me. Thank you for choosing me, for trusting me, for being my partner in everything." They went inside together, closing the door on another day, another year, another decade of their shared life. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new joys, but they would face them together as they always had, partners, friends, lovers, husband and wife. The mail-order bride arrangement that had brought them together was long forgotten, replaced by a love story that had lasted 30 years and would last until their final days. Catherine had arrived expecting cruelty and found tenderness instead, and that tenderness had transformed both their lives, creating something beautiful and lasting that would echo through generations. As she fell asleep that night in Thomas's arms, just as she had done for 30 years, Catherine smiled. She had found her home, her purpose, her love. She had found everything she never knew she needed. And it had all started with a single brave decision to leave the past behind and trust in the possibility of a better future. The cowboy had shown her tenderness she never knew existed, and in doing so had given her the greatest gift of all, a life worth living, filled with love and laughter, and the quiet joy of days spent beside the person you love most in the world. It was more than enough. It was everything.